In my last video, I couldn't believe that there seemed to be a woman who thought the sun turned off at night.
If NASA says it's too hot to go to the sun, then why don't we go at night when the sun turns off?
And I still don't know if she was serious.
My mighty heart is breaking.
And sadly, I can believe this is true, because these people were given a map of the world and were given the task of pointing to and identifying a country.
Africa?
That's a continent.
Oh God. Is it South Africa?
Nope.
Africa.
That's a continent.
Oh, we have the country of Asia.
Nope. That's a continent, and
Oh,
that's
oops.
Russia.
Greenland or Iceland or something?
That's Alaska.
That makes me kind of sad, and like my video is frankly lacking something. There we go. I feel much better now I have my comfort Ana de Armas, because this week I wanted to review the sparkling, all new 2024 adaptation of the Stephen King vampire horror book Salem's Lot. But I can't really, because much like many things I review, considering how much of the book story they've changed to make this movie, I'm not sure I could rightly even call it an adaptation of that book, to the extent that there are characters in the book version that survive the story that do not survive this film. It's barely even the same story any longer. There's barely a book scene that they left intact in this film. The character Parkins Gillespie is the town's main lawman. In the book, he survives the story and goes to live with his sister in Kittery, Maine. In this film, he's played by William Sadler, and this happens to him.
What about the sheriff?
In the book, the character Father Callahan survives the story and runs away in disgrace, his faith broken. In this film, this happens to him.
His faith failed.
They changed Ben Mears, the lead character's backstory. In the book, there was a road accident and he lost his wife. In this version, it was his parents instead. The ending is now a showdown in a drive-in movie theatre full of vampires. That never happened in the book either. Ben Mears' love interest, Susan Norton, no longer has a dad in this film version for reasons. It seems Hollywood just hates devoted fathers. Ben no longer first meets Susan in a park. Now she works at an estate agent's instead of as an artist. She pursues him instead of vice versa. It's the story of a writer that returns to a town he grew up in, falls in love, and then people in the town start to disappear as they're picked off one by a master vampire called Barlow and his growing brood of converts, until finally, after a great deal of loss, he's stopped. Every film version seems to get Mr. Barlow wrong, and instead of a refined vampire mastermind, instead has him as an animalistic goblin creature. The story appears to have been brought to film 3 times now according to IMDb. With every new version, the review score has gotten lower. The film also has strange casting, but every version of Salem's Lot kind of has. This version has the vampire's familiar R.T. Straker being played by Pilu Asbeck of all people, who played Euron Greyjoy in Game of Thrones. Sorry, wrong footage. Editor, I swear to God.
Does she like it gentle or rough? A finger in the bum.
Thank you. Yeah, that guy. And rereading the book, I had a great time again. Straker is described in the book as being a smooth-talking Englishman and was played in an earlier film version by the great James Mason. But I couldn't help but notice that in the book, Straker's dad is supposed to be from Manchester, and there's just something less scary about the character when imagined with a Yorkshire accent, having this ogre of a man arriving in town and saying, "Hey up! I'm Richard Throckett Straker," though I suppose that's not really a Manchester accent, is it? More generic Yorkshire. He should, I suppose, maybe sound more like Manchester's first son and national treasure, Mr. Carl Pilkington.
Yeah, but I've seen knobs before.
Have you?
Yeah.
Where?
You see knobs all the time.
Where?
In gyms and that. If you're not happy looking a knob in the face, there's something wrong.
In the original story is set in the 70s, so there are lots of scenes of people smoking in the book. In this new version, they're gone. In the book, there was also quite a lot of characters being casually homophobic. Also gone in this film version. It wasn't like it was an endorsement of doing that in the original book. It was people being nasty. Rafts of changes appear to have been made to make the story more feminist. It seems like every story now has to be retrospectively edited and sanitised to match Hollywood's current politics, until the story has been mangled beyond all recognition. The town in Salem's Lot, in the book, was filled with sin. From the alcoholic priest, to the too young teenage mother hurting her own baby, to the school bus driver who bullies the kids, and the husband who hurts his wife when he finds her cheating on him, and a number of adults that look at the kids of the town for a bit too long. The film did not have the guts to show the book story warts and all, and for me, all those things are needed for the story to have impact. It's all setting the stage. In previous decades, Hollywood felt fine about manipulating their audience into smoking. They don't do that so much anymore, but it seems they still feel just fine about trying to manipulate the audience. And frankly, I find people trying to manipulate me offensive. Sadly, I also found many of the changes in this version to be detrimental to the story, particularly in how they changed the pacing of it. In short, this story, first published in 1975, has been current yeared. Apart from not being a very faithful adaptation of the book, I felt disappointed by the film overall, and was trying to work out what exactly is wrong with it, because there isn't anything that obvious, like bad acting.
This is my house!
Or bad directing, but it committed the cardinal sin of a horror movie. It failed to be scary. And that for me directly came from the changes that they made to the story. It failed to build up and make me care about the characters, and it's a lot less scary if I can't identify with the characters in peril. In other ways, they just messed up the execution of scenes that were in the book genuinely disturbing. The book built up a slow burn of creepiness, and in this film, those moments like Mike Ryerson in the graveyard burying Danny Glick have just been reduced to jump scares. That book scene I still find very creepy. Danny Glick in the coffin, manipulating the gravedigger's thoughts to keep him there until dark so Danny can feed on him. How he can feel Danny looking at him even through the coffin lid. In this film version, the gravedigger just oversleeps and it's now a jump scare. It should have been very easy to make this film both scary and good, because all you need is right there in the book. And they still somehow missed the mark. The original story I've always found to be pretty solid, so how can you mess that up? The author has already written it all down for you. Well, it turns out all you have to do to mess it up is change practically every scene and character in the story and make them all worse. Rafts of changes and edits have been made to what is arguably Stephen King's most popular story that seem to have been done either to compress the story and fit it into under 2 hours, or to cater to the weird political peccadillos of current year Hollywood. And for some reason, Stephen King is listed as a writer on this as well, and who knows how that conversation went. Maybe, "Hello, Stephen. Here is a suitcase full of money. I'm giving you that because we really want to get your permission to thoroughly ruin one of your stories. Yeah, we really like it and all, and that's why we're going to change almost every character and almost everything that happens in the story." Still, it's a very big briefcase, isn't it? And your dignity didn't survive you joining Twitter anyway. And I'm not joking, they did change almost everything about the story. And did they race swap the character Mark Petrie? Well, at first I thought so, but then not really. Because Mark Petrie, the heroic young man in the story, was white in the previous 2 film adaptations of this book. And now he's African American in this one. But when the character is introduced, the book doesn't describe his skin colour, or in fact the ethnicity of most of the characters in the story. So by having glasses in this version, it seemed they actually managed to get closer to the book, if anything. Though weirdly, the book doesn't seem able to decide how tall Mark Petrie is. On page 36 it says he towered over most of his classmates, but on page 96 it says at age 12 Mark Petrie was a little smaller than the average and slightly delicate looking. So because Stephen King doesn't describe many features of the characters, in making an adaptation that's going to be true to the book, there's almost endless scope for them to cast whoever they want in a film version and still not screw anything up. And then they somehow still manage to screw things up, because awkwardly on page 96 of the book it also says that Mark Petrie's complexion was fair almost milky. Out of the entire cast of characters in the book, they changed pretty much the only ones who did get described in the book, and that was Dr. Cody and Mark Petrie, because the book describes Dr. Cody as being a young man with a shock of red hair. In another place it describes how his face had gone pale and how his freckles look. So I'm picturing the character Scott Tenorman from South Park. So obviously when they made the film, they cast Alfre Woodard as Dr. Cody, a black woman who's 70 years old. And I don't really see it as an accident that they race-swapped maybe the two most heroic characters in the entire book, and made them African American, and even made Mark Petrie even more heroic than in the book. Amazon Studios even has a checklist of political hoops for writers to jump through if they want to make something for them. This is how we ended up with the Rings of Power. I had to think for a while about why this movie didn't work for me, because in the changes they made, they did write in errors. Particularly, it loses any sense of time in places. The sun sets as the plot dictates, and the last day of the story seems to last about 25 minutes, from daybreak until sunset, but that isn't really the problem. Neither is it something obvious like the acting, that's all pretty fine to good as well. But it made me think back to my review of Deadpool and Wolverine, where although the story had some issues, it worked for me as a comedy because it managed to be funny, and I concluded that was all a comedy really needs to be a successful comedy. Salem's Lot is a horror, and all it needs to be a successful horror is to be scary, and sadly this version for me isn't, and a lot of that is due to the pacing. The book is quite a slow burn that goes from normality and slowly gets crazier and crazier over time, and holds back on showing you the vampire Mr. Barlow for quite a long time in the story. During the first 50 or so pages of the book, the only thing that gets done in is a dog that gets impaled on the gate at a graveyard. The dog being found also isn't in the film. The whole thing I can maybe liken to being a domino rally. If you set up each domino and stand them in the right place, one nudge and the whole thing moves on its own. For the payoff to work, you need the setup first. And this film for me badly failed on the setups. In this film, the vampire lord Mr. Barlow instead arrives in town in under 5 minutes of the film starting, that's including the credits. You see him just standing there within the first half hour. This movie seems to have been made for people who haven't got the attention span for YouTube shorts. So instead of the slow burn and building tension that happened in previous adaptations of this book, or in the book itself, you get this. And jump scares. So sadly that's what this film delivers for me. Not something awful, not a 1 out of 10, nor something brilliant, a 10 out of 10. Beset by politics, it's a decidedly average, well, poorly paced and poorly executed version of a frankly very good book story that fails in the primary purpose of a horror, to horrify and be scary.
Where's America?
I would say this big one, but I'm probably wrong.
You're definitely wrong.
Okay.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.